I see we have a quorum. It's wonderful. Ms. Stamp, can you hear me, Ms. Stamp? You're on mute. On
Yes,
mute.
I can.
Excellent. Stephen, can you hear me? Excellent. Good. Welcome to the August 1st, 2023 committee meeting of Audit and Finance. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Is there any discussion regarding today's agenda? Hearing none, I'd like to have a motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
Second.
All in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 One against? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. We'll move on to item 1, which is the approval of the July 6, 2023 Audit and Finance Committee minutes. Any discussion regarding the minutes? Like a motion to approve the minutes as written? Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against? Hearing none, the motion passes and minutes are approved. On to item 1D, approval of the minutes of the special meeting of July 13th, 2023. Any discussion regarding those minutes? Hearing none, I'd like a motion. Minutes written.
So moved.
Second. Vote, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against? None. Hearing none, the minutes are approved as written. On to item 2A, a procurement update.
There's a lot of static and not really understanding some of what you're saying.
I appreciate that, Ms. Stamp. We will check right now. Can you hear me without any static?
That's better.
Maybe it's because I was blowing through this as quickly as possible. My speed was your static.
Okay.
Excellent. On to item 2A, procurement update by Muldean and Jenkins. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, sir, members of the committee.
If you could identify yourself for the record.
Absolutely. My name is David Roberts. I'm a partner with Mulden and Jenkins, and I'm the engagement partner for the project that we've been doing. And with me is Kate Russell. She's a director with Mulden and Jenkins as well. Great. So this is our update related to the procurement department transformation assistance that we've been working on. As you know, we came before the committee and presented our results of the 5230 audit. And with that, there were a number of recommendations related to transformation that we've been working in collaboration with the procurement department on over the past several months. And this is that update. Go through a couple of quick topics. First, we'll talk about the current environment of the department. Second, progress to date in terms of what the department and Mulden and Jenkins have been able to achieve. Our remaining planned activities. And then lastly, Kate will go over a customer satisfaction survey that was performed throughout the district related to the procurement department. So first, related to the current environment. I think that, or I know that the culture, the morale, the work environment has improved dramatically within the past several months. They have embraced recommendations from not only our report, but prior other audit reports related to operations. And everybody in the procurement department has been a strong partner with us in this transformation. A lot of collaboration, a lot of communication. We've had a very strong on-site presence, and we've worked very closely with each member of the procurement staff. And in addition, the department is starting to work more than they were before with BIM, so business intelligence and information management, and looking at ways to automate certain processes that have been more manual in the past. And so we're looking at driving efficiencies and effectiveness. Over the past couple of months, working with the CFO, helped to implement a biweekly meeting, and that's with the CFO and the procurement department. And communication there has, in my opinion, dramatically improved as well. And on those calls, we kind of have a go around the horn, if you will, and everybody reports out key events and activities. And there's good crosstalk in terms of awareness among the department staff and again, collaboration. And certainly, I think that there's a motivated culture. And I'll highlight a couple of things that we've accomplished thus far. But as we were going through and really creating the policies and procedures for the department that were lacking, really, we spent a lot of time with each member to really understand their detailed roles and responsibilities. And they were very engaging, very forthcoming. And clearly they had ideas that may or may not have been communicated before about how they can improve their job and improve their customer service and really the operations. And as I said, the customer service satisfaction survey was very positive. Kate's going to go through that, but the department's feeling good. Progress to date. So as I mentioned, we have been on site, maintained a significant presence, working closely with the department. And we certainly have provided special technical assistance as needed. There were a number of compliance issues that were identified, not only from the Malden and Jenkins audit, but from other audits as well. Many of those issues have been resolved, and there are still some that are pending that we hope to finalize and resolve those issues once the new procurement director comes on. We've been looking at business requirements and IT solutions. So some of the issues that were plaguing the department related to the current automation within Munis. And we've been exploring additional options and solutions inside and outside of Munis. And we documented and completed the standard operating procedures for the department. This was a consistent finding from multiple firms over multiple years. We worked, as I said, very closely with the department. We identified 48 key processes and 8 functions, and now, which has resulted in a 90-page document for operations and procedure manual. Our planned activities going forward, we're going to continue to provide the remedies for the existing audit findings. We're going to continue to assist with identifying the right IT solution or upgrade or add-on related to the procurement module. Now that we have the processes and procedures documented, we are now going to start creating job aids, training materials, and onboarding framework, not only for existing procurement department staff, but also their end users. We're going to help facilitate internal and external training. We're going to help drive key KPIs, key performance indicators throughout the department and enhance what currently exists. And we're going to continue to work on dashboard reporting, getting more visibility into finance and to the board itself. And lastly, we will provide transition support once that new department director is onboarded. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Kate Russell, to go through the customer service satisfaction results, and certainly happy to answer any questions.
So before we move into the customer satisfaction survey results, can we ask a couple of questions about what you just went over?
That's a good point. But do we want them to finish and then come back? I think it may be easier just to let them finish the presentation, then come back with the questions. Is that okay with you, Ms. Stamp?
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to briefly highlight some of the results of the customer service satisfaction survey that went out to different members of the CCSD employees who interact with the procurement department on a regular basis. The survey was borne out in part to help establish baselines for the customer service that has been historically provided by the procurement department, and in part to give us kind of a starting point based on some observations in other audits over the last couple of years related to responsiveness and customer service of staff within that department. I'm going to go over it very briefly. We're happy to answer questions, and then copies of all of the results that I'm talking about were provided to you in the deck for today. So we received and analyzed 179 results from different end users who interact with procurement throughout both schools and other departments within CCSD. And looking at that, the first thing we wanted to understand was the general level of comfort and understanding that these different users have when interacting with procurement and with the procurement process itself. And overall, the results were really positive here. 91% of all of those 179 folks said that they were comfortable or stronger than comfortable in being able to navigate the procurement process and understanding what their role was. On the next slide, if those of you won't follow along with the slides, we asked them, how long does it take contracts and procurement staff to resolve your issue or answer any questions that you may have? And then we also wanted to understand how satisfied those end users were with the information that they've been provided by procurement staff when asking those questions or seeking that assistance. And really, this was a really strong response. 86% of the end users said their issue was resolved in 24 or 48 hours, which is an incredible timeline to be able to resolve the majority of the requests that you get for assistance or information. I think there is an opportunity to learn more about the types of questions that folks were asking that take a week or longer to get resolved. So that's something we'll want to dig in on in the coming months. But I think we're thrilled with the overall rate of the majority of the questions being answered within 48 hours or less. And then again, the other thing to kind of caveat here is we asked them their satisfaction. And for some of those folks, 14% overall were kind of average fair report was the answer. What we don't know based on this initial survey is it they didn't like the response? Is it that it added complications to their job in order to follow procurement policy or process? So we really want to dig in and make sure we're understanding what that level of satisfaction was and why, to make sure we enhance the customer service there for those who felt that their information received was poor or fair. On the next one, we asked them to rate communications abilities. So it's not only answering the questions, are you giving a full answer that the end user is able to understand and leverage and being able to perform their job as it relates to procurement? And a strong majority of the respondents actually rated the C&P staff very high in their communication skills. When you looked at some of the open-ended prompts that we asked, that asked them just to provide kind of a typed response rather than responding to a ranking, a number of them used the words knowledgeable, responsive, and a few of them said they were willing to take the time to make sure they really understood that end user's question, to get them the right answer for the question, the environment, the dollar amount and vendor that they're working with, so that they have the right answer to get that procurement process right the first time. We did note several comments from end users who noted that there were challenges in reaching the C&P staff. As it notes, some said that they felt that C&P staff are away from their desk and then they have to call around to different members of the department to get the answer that they wanted. A few of them also suggested that C&P staff weren't always sensitive to the end user's timeline or need for the request. I think that's something we want to dig in on, since again, 86% of the respondents said that their question was answered in 48 hours or less. So we need to understand what that timeline of expectation is. We may need to work to reset that for end users, because 48 hours is a really strong turnaround time for answering and resolving issues. We also asked them just to generally rate the customer service. We gave them options from excellent to poor. And overall, when you're thinking about benchmarking for good customer service, most industry standards are somewhere between 75 and 85% is a good customer service score. And so C&P staff being rated as very good or excellent by 83% of those 179 people, I think says that overall the service that they're providing, the responsiveness of their timeline, their professionalism are all strong, and that those end users are generally pleased with what they're getting from the department. I think we want to start understanding the fair and poor responses so we can dig in on the root causes of that and make sure we're minimizing the number of people who feel that the customer service that they receive is fair or poor. But we'll need to do a little more work to understand that to begin addressing those root causes. And then finally, the final category of analysis we wanted to bring before you today relates to the training that is offered to end users by contracts and procurement staff. This was the weakest area of all of the areas we analyzed, but it was still a strong overall response. About 60% of the end users who responded to the survey said that the training that they received was good or excellent. I think what we learned is they need additional training, whether it's through more times during the year to provide kind of that on-demand live training. But we also want to make sure that we can enhance that response time by creating more self-service resources, where your end users can go to a website on your intranet to get FAQs, to get job aids, to get walkthroughs of different common procurement and other purchasing and P-card processes, so they don't have to reach out to the contracts and procurement staff as much. So as David noted, that is something we'll be working on with them in the coming months, is creating more of those resources for end users to be able to access them on demand, rather than having to reach out and wait for a procurement department staff to contact them. And with that, I will pause because I understand there are some questions.
Are there any questions from the committee members?
So I have a couple. Going back to the progress today, you state that many of the issues have been resolved and resolutions pending on certain items. Can you provide us with some examples of some of the issues that were resolved, and what are some of those pending items that you still feel need to be resolved?
Yes, ma'am. Great question. Happy to do that. In terms of some of the issues that were resolved, I think first and foremost, the largest was the lack of having documented policies and procedures. That has been resolved, and that was a very common finding across multiple audits. Other areas in terms of operational standardization and consistency in terms of how things were done has also been implemented as well. For items that still are pending, one finding is related to job aids and training, and we're in the process of creating those job aids and training for the internal department as well as external users. And then another example of something that's pending relates to the vendor application form process. Historically, the department has relied on self-reporting from the vendors without really formalized tracking and follow-up to ensure the designation or certifications that certain vendors have, that those are accurate and current, and we're working on processes and automation for that as well.
Okay. So what are some of the, you said enhanced KPIs throughout the department? What are some of the KPIs that has been established for the department?
Absolutely. Kate, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So make sure I'm back on that. So right now, school district models a standard set that looks somewhat at cost of savings through the procurement process, time of procurement, some more things that we would quantify kind of as outputs and initial KPIs, but isn't speaking as much to some of the performance drivers and enhancements that we like to see in the department. So we want to make sure that we understand what's being tracked, make sure there's a consistent baseline, and then think about challenging the department to enhance and improve those, thinking more about customer service, thinking more about improving some of those times to procure, enhancing those vendor relationships, and getting more vendors engaged within the district as well. We're still working through some of those baselines from the Great City Schools model to figure out how we can leverage those for enhanced or additional KPIs in the future.
And just on the, my last question has to do with on the customer satisfaction. What was the population that the survey went out to? I know you said you had 179 responses, but what was the total population that you targeted?
I'll admit I do not have that in front of me. We will get that information back to you there.
Okay. All right. Those were my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. As far as the munis as well as are we waiting? I know it's still pending evaluation and further demos from that platform and other platforms. Are we actually waiting for a director of procurement to come in to help make that decision whether we're going to stick with the one we have or moving forward?
So I'm not sure the governance of it, but from a timing perspective, I think the new director would likely be here before a decision is made.
Mm-hmm. Is that preferred?
I think there's pros and cons. I think that, you know, as we go through the process of evaluating different solutions, we're certainly going to look at the lift that it takes, whether it's a bolt-on or something similar to what Munis already has, one of their products, or something different. So we are working closely not only with finance but we're working with IT as well. So I think that there are pros and cons of waiting, but I think that from a timing perspective, the new director would likely be here before that decision is made.
So is that person close to being hired, or what's the director?
I think we'd have to direct that question to Dr. Galian or Ms.
Okay.
Garland.
Yes,
Okay,
we are actually interviewing this week, and hopefully we'll have a recommendation moving forward early next week to Dr. Gallion.
was the staff involved in the selection process, or will they be involved in the selection process for the director?
No, ma'am. We have a diverse interview group that includes procurement staff from another school district, as well as procurement experts internally that work with capital programs, things of that nature. There's about 7 people on the interview team, and 1 is an external person from another school district that does procurement.
So they will have no input at all.
No, ma'am, not typically. We don't handle interviews that way or selections that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions, Mr. Calhoun? Any other questions from staff? It looks like, from what I'm hearing, that you've expanded your involvement past 5230 in developing a policy now that's 98 pages. I'm assuming that covers all of the procurement purchases?
So we are, so from a procedural perspective, that is correct. There are certain policies that we would like to get the incoming director's input, whomever that is, to give them the opportunity to help shape and quote unquote finalize some of those thresholds and policy levels.
Because as I look at the original report, which was drafted back in February, and we received after we had let go of our procurement director. So we've been without a procurement director since March or something, and then we got the report. One of the it's always been one of these confounding things why we didn't have a director. Are you used to, in your process of doing these audits and working with procurement departments, of not having a director? I mean, we're now 4 or 5 months out. It just seems kind of odd that you're going in setting policy without a director.
So again, what we've done is we've captured the operations perspective. So from a procedure and workflow, we certainly are not members of your staff or employees, so we can't quote unquote set policy. But what we are doing is we are teeing up everything so that it is ready for whomever the powers that be within your governance model. But first, as a first stop with your incoming department director, to get them guidance so that they can hit the ground running and knock this out quickly. So
Ms. Carlin, I guess this is directed to you. How's this funded? I mean, where are we coming up with the funding to bring in an audit company to be doing what a director should be doing?
General operating fund is covering this.
Excuse me?
General operating fund is covering these auditing services.
Is that an item that we've placed in the upcoming budget to oversee in the future?
Well, we've placed it for the FY24 budget, but I haven't moved any further than that. So.
Since I wasn't really part of this, because we didn't know about you until, March, April. So I don't know the contract and how this worked. Was this part of the contractual side of it for them to step in and act as the director? I mean, for this period of time?
They're not really acting as the director. What we've done is we've been able to spread the director job duties among the 3 officers.
Got it.
Their plates are very, very full. And so to answer your question, the Malden and Genius is not acting as a procurement director. I'm overseeing the officers, and we're doing the best we can right now until we're able to select, a new director to come in. As you know, we tried to do this a few months ago, and unfortunately, we were not able to conduct the interviews because of the hiring freeze. And so that's another reason why it's taken us this long.
Got it. So the org chart that was part of the original audit is pretty accurate as the date, or have we lost any further people from this org chart?
There was, I believe, 1 position that was eliminated because it had been vacant for more than a year. but I can't see the org chart, but as far as I know, there have not been any major changes in the procurement office on their organizational chart.
Is that something that you looked at as a possibility of a need for this department and increasing its org chart?
So I think we looked at it anecdotally, and what I mean by that is it specifically wasn't in our scope, but as we identified in our initial audit, there are several opportunities for efficiency. And I think that as you look at any organization, you want to try and gain as much efficiency as you can, and then reevaluate. But from my perspective, there clearly is a need for a department director.
And I'm happy to hear that morale is up, because it sounds like basically what you've done is you've come in and taken a department that obviously had issues and stepped up and cleaned up some of the procedures. I'm glad to hear that we have a policy, and that the costs have been, but I go back to your original audit, and I see one of your main statements. If you go back to page 4, you were concerned that many of the past procedures that you were looking at as applied to 5/20/30, many departments maybe have been directly negotiating with vendors. And I was shocked when I saw the Board of Trustees exemptions. And did you ever look at that? Did you have a time to look at the exemptions under the system?
I don't believe we formally did.
And we're going to be talking about this today. It just amazes me that, for staff development, and I've seen this 710 1.7 to include but not limited to training provided by consultants, certified teachers, trainers, district personnel, training materials secured by prepared for instructional purposes, workshop, conferences, seminars, registrations, travel expenses, my favorite, such as airfare, hotels, and registrations. I mean, these are totally, as I read it, under the department's ability, or anybody in this ability to file this, and it never goes through procurement. I mean, somehow this doesn't seem right. And I know this goes back to the Title 11, public financing, which was done back in 2011. Is this something you're going to be looking at? Because I find it very hard, because I think every ESSER approval that I have seen has come in with an exemption, which shows that none of it went through procurement.
We certainly would be happy to take a look at that, sir.
Now, does the exemption mean that it doesn't go through procurement, or that procurement use the exemption as the criteria for allowing or to use that vendor?
Ms. Carlin, you want to clarify that?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Stamp, you're right. The latter part of what you just said is what transpires, that procurement uses those specific exemptions based upon the criteria or the language that's used in the contract.
So they basically input all the data into the Munis system.
Sorry, say that again?
So when somebody uses that exemption, or department head uses that exemption and applies for a PO, just walk me through the process. They hand it in, they say, this is the exemption. Procurement then checks it off. It is an exemption, and it goes into the system.
Yes.
Then what happens?
Yes. Then it, depending on the price or the cost, it goes on the $250,000 list. If it's less than that, then it'll be input as a requisition and executed as a purchase order, and we move forward and contract with the vendor.
And it now gets contracted by the vendor. And now who oversees and audits what the vendor's doing on price changes? Any expense changes or anything, any of the auditing process that if it had gone through the procurement process, would be responsible for procurement.
I think you're getting way in the weeds on this. I'm so sorry. We verify that the invoice pricing ties back to the purchase order. We do that in-house with our accounting firm. If there's a price change, as long as it doesn't go over the maximum amount on the purchase order, then we would pay it. We would execute it for payment.
Okay.
If it's over the purchase order amount, then there
are steps that are in
processes
place
that take place to make sure that we're.
I think that's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Is what processes are there in place that would prevent, department heads from going directly without any competition or anything, getting this exemption and choosing somebody to hire a vendor? Because when I look at all these vendors lists, I see a lot of names that are very familiar to the district. And as I see it, there's no competitive bidding on any of this because there's special exemptions. And there's no, I know the sole source documentation. So when you went back through your audit, did you look at the documentation that would have been supporting all these special exemptions?
The focus of our audit was related to 5230.
5230.
Yes, sir.
But you did get involved in developing a new procedural.
That is correct.
So these would have fallen under the new procedural, right? Correct?
Sir, that's part of our procurement code. They weren't auditing our actual procurement code. They were auditing the findings that came out of the disparity study. We're talking about two completely different things here.
I understand, Ms. Carlin, but they did write a new policy.
They
For-
updated policies, but
updated
not
policy.
related to the exemptions
Oh, just solely to 5230?
Mhm.
Oh,
and vendor interaction.
98 pages on 5230?
Well, there are other things involved as well, like their
Right.
day-to-day processes. Everybody was doing something different. And so what this team did is they came in and met with everybody and really, and actually developed a procurement job outline of what everybody's supposed to do. It's almost like a desk procedures manual that we never had before.
Really?
Mhm.
Excellent. So explain to me then the accounting system, because I know you're working with IT. I see as a wish list, you're thinking, and Stephen, you should be all over this one. A wish list of other types of software to be using. Is that what I'm hearing?
To enhance procurement operations,
Such as?
you know,
Sure. So right now, the procurement function, there isn't a contracts management system that is either within Munis or within another system. So most of the contract tracking and the flow of contracts for all the people who have to review and sign those contracts, that's all a manual process where a physical sheet of paper is moving from person to person for review in the system right now. Procurement, most of the solicitations and bids that are competitively bid right now, it is still a paper-based process where you have advertising and you have people bringing physical copies of their bids back to the district office for opening and review and evaluation. So those are the two biggest things we're trying to evaluate, whether an in-unit solution or a different solution would be the best fit for the staff and for their needs to increase that workflow, that transparency, and that efficiency in their processes.
So I'm assuming this is something you're waiting for the new director to step in so that you can further discuss it as to the potentials out there.
from a decision-making,
Yeah.
absolutely. We're trying to do as much legwork as we can so that when that new director comes on board.
Which sounds like it's gonna be pretty soon. So
Yes, sir.
that's good. Back to this concern about other departments. And I understand you just went to 5230s, but my concern is that it's rampant throughout any of the processes. And it's not like I want to impede it because I understand in talking, doing a lot of research on these special exemptions that there is definitely a need for some, hands down. I think Mr. Bowery would be all over me if I knocked off some of these, if I wiped them all off or recommended that, because I can't do anything. If I recommended to the board to wipe them all off, it'd be an interesting day. But as you can see, when I look at it just from an outsider and looking in, it's hard for me to even stomach these special exemptions. When I see what they allow, I just can't see how department heads can do stuff without competitive bidding. But that's,
Well, and I can explain that more in detail when we
Mhm.
get to that particular
Please.
item on the agenda, because I did some research
Mhm.
to give everyone an idea of the exemptions we're consistently using. So just to give a clear picture of what we are using as far as these exemptions are concerned.
great. And that will be perfect. So do you want to hold off on that until we get to that section?
Yes, please.
I think so. I think you're great. So let's just stick to this. That being said. Just double check. While I'm checking my notes, are there any, if I raise any further questions from the other committee members?
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. One last question. When do you think you're going to be done?
That's a great question. So I think with what we currently have in scope, we'll be finished within 3 to 4 months.
3 to
I
4
think-
months.
I think that if there is delays in the department director position getting filled, then that certainly would impact that.
And it would seem that based upon your involvement in this, that you've gotten pretty deep into the weeds where we shouldn't go, but deep into the weeds as to how the procurement has been running with all the departments.
From a centralized procurement function, yes, we have not gone out into other user departments or other areas. We focused on the centralized aspect of it.
So how a department would contact procurement, not
Yes.
how procurement would oversee what, because I'm wondering about how we are getting the understanding of what the procurement code is out to some of these department heads.
Yes, sir. And that actually ties into our end user training that we were
End
talking
user.
about earlier. Absolutely want to increase awareness so that everybody certainly understands the processes. But as we know right now, there are certain procedural checks and balances.
And out of the list of findings on the observations and recommendations that you've made, it sounds like we're almost 90% through on this.
Yes, sir. A large.
That's excellent.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions from the committee? Hearing none, we will move on. Thank you
sir.
very, very much.
Maggie, can you please pull up? Thank you, ma'am.
So we'll move on to item 2A, which is the agreed upon procedures report, 1 cent sales tax capital program by Elliot Davis.
Hi, excuse me, Cindy, are you still on the call? Do you want to kick this one off or do you want me to? I don't know if she can hear me or not.
She's on mute. I'm asking her to unmute. See if thumbs up.
Can you guys hear me?
Cindy, have you joined by phone?
So I can kick it off. Not a big deal. So Cindy is the shareholder on the engagement. Cindy Williams. My name is Kim Davis. I'm the senior manager on the engagement. Cindy's unfortunately not able to be here in person. Looks like we're having some technical difficulties, but no big deal. We'll still pop there. So as I mentioned, this is on our agreed upon procedures over the 1 cent sales tax program. The 2017 to 2022 program, specifically covering the period from January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2022. So the second half of that program. If you guys want to go to the next slide real quick. So it's just kind of an overview of what we did. So as I mentioned, it's an agreed upon procedures in accordance with AICPA attestation standards. The purpose of it is to assist the district in kind of evaluating that sales tax program that I just mentioned. We go through a sample selection process for various different procedures, look at capital building projects, capital maintenance projects, and technology replacement and upgrade projects within that sales tax program. Kind of how we make our sample selections. We look at the stage of the project. So depending on which procedure it is, we may look at something from a contract acquisition or close out, stuff like that, depending on where that project is. the overall size of the project, trying to get a wide range of those projects, and the overall coverage of those projects. So if we tested something in the first half of the sales tax program, probably wouldn't want to test it again this go around, and making sure that we're not testing, you know, the same 2 projects for every single step. So making sure we're getting a wide coverage of those different projects. So long story short, with all these different procedures, we're basically verifying that the process from bid through completion, as well as GL transactions kind of going throughout the project, are functioning as intended. So I'm going to go over kind of the different procedures that we did that were outlined in our agreed upon procedures, but this was just kind of an overview slide to let you know kind of big picture what we were doing with this engagement. So you want to go to the next slide, please. So the first procedure was kind of just a generic going over policies and procedures, talking with various different people within the department to see if there had been any changes in those policies and procedures for the 4 key areas associated with it. So acquisition selection strategy, architect selections, contractor selections, and then operational management. And no exceptions were identified in this. There hadn't been any changes to the previous report that we did 3 years ago on the first half of this project. And I forgot to mention this on the overview, kind of a overarching caveat for this. We didn't have really any exceptions. There's one minor finding that I'll talk about on one of these, but it's consistent. Any of you that have been around here for, I think we do this roughly every 3 years. So it's consistent with what we've had in the past. Like I said, I'll cover that on that specific procedure, but blanket statement, no exceptions identified in any of them. So we'll move on to the second procedure. So this was kind of over the awarding of contracts. So around the bidding process, we took a sample of 4 capital building contracts and 1 capital maintenance contract. As you can imagine, the capital building contracts are much more robust and in-depth than a capital maintenance contract would be, because, you know, you're building a school and stuff like that versus an HVAC unit type thing. So that's why we kind of sample a larger number of capital building contracts. We looked to make sure that there were bonds and certificates of insurance for each of these, they were received and that they were current. We looked at the bid tabulations to make sure that they all kind of agreed with your attendance sheets. We made sure that only bids that were received timely were included in all of that. And that was kind of indicated by timestamps. District procedures were followed for architect selections for capital building projects. That was specific to capital building, just given the nature of capital maintenance. Architects aren't really needed for that. And then we also looked at advertising mechanisms used by the district to make sure that they were appropriate for each of those that we selected. The next procedure is over kind of the contract selection process. So once again, no exceptions identified. We noted there was an acquisition committee, and you can see who all is made up of that acquisition committee. And that kind of committee helps determine which types of contracts are recommended to the superintendent. Once again, we selected a sample of 4 capital building contracts, 1 capital maintenance. We made sure there were a quality assurance committee was there for each one of those. There were non-disclosure certificates and statements of financial interest on file for each member of those committees. There's a technical rating given for each of the selected contracts. And then we also noted superintendent approval, signifying concurrence with that selection. So the next procedure that we did was over kind of contract modifications and approval. So you have this initial contract, it's been approved, but obviously stuff happens. Contracts probably are going to have some change orders involved in them. We didn't have any exceptions identified in our procedures that we did over this. We picked a sample of 5 projects and looked at least 20% of any change orders for that selected project. So if there were 5 change orders during the period, for example, we would have looked at 2. We kind of rounded up to get to the 20%. And then we looked to make sure that they were properly approved. So they're going through the approval process to issue those change orders, and then they had reason codes provided for each of those change orders. And then we also looked to make sure there was processes for any emergency issues. And so those are the responsibility of the on-site contractor for specific emergency, like safety issues, stuff like that. But anything that resulted in a change to the scope of the contract, dollar amount, that kind of thing, it went through the change order process that we tested up above. And all those safety issues, delays, et cetera, those are all covered in the level 2 executive meetings, which we'll talk about in another procedure that we looked at. So the next procedure, we looked at project budgets. And this is one of those that I mentioned was like a minor finding. I still not really a finding, but this is the only one where I wouldn't say no exceptions identified. So we looked at 6 capital project financial reports that were presented to the board, and the quote unquote finding is just due to timing. So as you would imagine, there's a lot of stuff that happens to close out reports from the time that a report has to be ran to be presented to the board to when it's actually finalized. So we're looking at reports to compare to board reports that are after everything's been closed out, but obviously the board reports contain stuff before a lot of those entries. So that's kind of I say it's a finding, but it was identified by management before we even got in to do our testing. They had it reconciled. It's been, discrepancies have been identified going forward type thing. So I say it's finding, but it's not really a finding, if that makes sense. It's just due to timing. And we didn't identify any budget shortfalls in our testing as well of those 6 reports that we looked at. The next procedure is over kind of your fund spending and covenant compliance. So there's no covenants associated with the program based on our discussions with management. So we selected a sample of 30 expenditures during the time period we were looking at to determine if they were expended on the specific project that they were coded to. So if it said, we picked project, I can't remember the name of all of them off the top of my head, project XYZ, and we picked this expenditure and it's coded to that project, making sure that it truly was for that project. That it's in accordance to with the board approved list of projects. The next procedure that we did is over payment approval. So making sure that before payments are being issued, that the amount charged to the project is a project cost within budget. So it's approved, it's budgeted for. We looked at the calculation method for progress payments. A lot of these are construction invoices, making sure that it's consistent between the projects. It's been approved. We recalculated retention if it was applicable and compared it to the actual retention that was withheld. We made sure that payment dates were being made timely, so 30 days from receiving the payment request. And then we also looked at some encumbrances, and we looked at a sample of 5 contracts, 1 encumbrance per contract, and making sure that it was tied to an approved purchase requisition. The next procedure that we did is over construction in progress balances. So we're also referred to as CIP. As you're going through construction projects, obviously, it's in process, so you're not going to have it finalized. It's not going to be put into service until it's completely finished. So we looked at a sample of 30 transactions to make sure that they were properly added to CIP and recorded in the proper time period based on those. Once again, no exceptions identified. The next procedure was kind of more about the closeout process. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So transfers out of CIP. So CIP transfers are done at the end of each fiscal year, regardless. So if it was completed in October, let's say, it wouldn't be closed out to fixed assets until June 30th of the following year, just kind of the way that the district accounts for their transfers to fixed assets. We looked at a sample of 5 projects that were transferred out of CIP to fixed assets. So basically saying they're complete and placed into service. And we looked to make sure that they were substantially complete at the date that they were transferred. We looked at the closeout procedures, noting that closeouts ranged anywhere from 7 to 22 months after the certificate of occupancy was issued. Keep in mind the timeline that we're looking at this was 2020 to 2022. So normally I would say 22 months kind of sounds alarming, but given COVID and everything, I don't know that that gives me as much concern. But just projects can be due to additional steps needed to finalize a contract, and anybody that's involved in construction knows you can have your little checklist of everything to be done, and ideally it'd be done on time, but contractors can take months to drag it out. So 7 to 22 months is kind of the range that we saw on closeout from certificate of occupancy to fully closing out the project. We're looking through it. But technically, if projects aren't closed out within 90 days, the district works to formulate a plan to try and get it closed out as soon as possible. We also made sure that there were post-performance evaluations done prior to close out of each of these projects. And once again, no exceptions. We also looked at some level 2 executive meetings, looked at 5 specifically, made sure that there were detailed notes, and it was reviewing, schedules, RFIs, safety, quality control, kind of all the different things that should be discussed in a level 2 meeting were being discussed for those projects. And then we also made sure that for a sample of 5 capital building projects that the use of approved chapter 117 inspectors, they were all properly licensed. So then just a couple more procedures that we did. The next one is just kind of over internal controls. So these were tested throughout a lot of the other procedures that I've gone over. But anything that wasn't tested, so over like revenue recognition, cash receipts, stuff like that, we looked at some documents, did some walkthroughs, and made sure that those processes and procedures were operating as they were intended to be, and no exceptions identified there. And then the last procedure that we did is kind of similar to the budget one. So the budget one was looking more at the budget side of this. This is looking at more of the actual spending on the financial information. So looked at a sample of 6 financial reports that were presented to the board. Similar to what I mentioned earlier, it's all a timing thing as far as something not agreeing back to the GL. But once again, those all were identified by management prior to us getting in there and testing them, and they've been corrected in months following. So point that out to you, but I wouldn't say it's anything to really be concerned about. And that kind of summarizes all the procedures that we did. I know it's a lot. So Cindy and my contact information is up there, but happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee?
Yes, I have a couple questions for the samples across the different procedures. How were they chosen? Were they chosen at random by you all, or were they given to you by the district? How were they actually picked out, and were they duplicated? Were they the same projects throughout each of them, or were they completely different projects, each one that you are using as a sample sizes?
Yeah, great question. So we determined those samples. The district kind of told us the procedures that they wanted to be done, and then we determined which ones we were going to test. So depending on the procedure, so for example, for a closeout procedure, we kind of looked at stuff that had been completed in that time frame and targeted towards that. If it was about spending, we may look at kind of the year-to-date expenditures, kind of select larger projects. There's kind of a rhyme and reason behind it, but also some of it was just random. As I mentioned in the first slide, kind of trying to get comfortable across the board. So some of them probably did duplicate steps, but we did try, and, maybe if this project was tested in step 2 and 3, we're not going to test it for step 5 and 6 type thing. So they may have duplicated, but we tried to spread it kind of across the board. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And then for the, y'all were actually looking at the overall contract, not the actual job. So, and I think that's where I got confused a little bit when you said making sure one of the procedures, making sure the things that were procured for were actually going to that job site and not used for something else. So y'all were only looking at the actual contract, correct?
So it depends on which step it was. So I think the one you're talking about is an expenditure. So that one with the expenditures, we would look and make sure. So if it's coded to, I can't remember the names of all the different schools and projects, but if it's going to this specific school project, which was on there, like we're making sure that it truly relates to that project. So in that one, we're not necessarily looking at the contract. We're looking more at this expenditure was coded for this project. It relates to that project, which was approved by the board.
Right. That's what I have for right now. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions from any committee members? Well, Mr. Bowery and Ms. Carlin, I think both your departments need to be commended. We should probably be using this as Exhibit A on our next referendum request, wouldn't you think? I mean, this sounds like you did. I apologize. Very good job. I'm very, very impressed. A very nice, very good report, very detailed, and
yeah, and I was just going to echo that. I forgot to mention that at the beginning of my presentation. Joyce and her team does a great job. It makes our job so much easier. Everything is very organized. Like I mentioned in the quote unquote finding, like all of that was identified prior to us even getting in there. So I just want to appreciate all their help getting us through. It's like you saw, it's a lot of procedures to go through as well, and they make it pretty seamless. So we appreciate all the help that we've gotten.
well, I'm always impressed with how we handle our capital funds. I really am. I think the reporting's great, and I think this validates what you've been doing. So congratulations. Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I'm just letting her go. Moving on to action items. We have our contracts greater than $250,000.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Carlin, please.
Thank you.
It's yours.
So this month's list consists of 16 projects, plus our charter schools payments and our private partnership payments. Most of these are annual costs for RICO, our copier services, as well as our transportation services, contracted security personnel, SROs with multiple municipalities, our Kronos timekeeping software. There's 2 roofing projects. There's also an HVAC project and staff development. And the total of these 16 projects is $119.2 million. And that concludes this part of the presentation, unless there's any other questions.
Are there any questions from the committee members regarding the items listed on the list for recommendation to the board? I have 2 items that I think is really more for clarification. And one is item number 8, the grant funding 873.
Yes. And so cultivating leadership, this is coming out of our internal consulting office that works with our EIR grant. This specific grant is in, I believe it's year 2 with the school district. And what they're doing is they're wanting to contract with cultivating leadership to support and execute their research project. It is an exemption item that falls under 710 1.7.
That's staff development.
It is, but I wanted to check just to be sure. Yes, it is. And this is actually professional development for teachers in a nutshell.
But this is fully funded from the grant.
Yes, it is. It's a federal grant.
So all compliance and everything would have been, which department would have been overseeing the compliance of this? I'm just trying to,
I'm sorry,
this
just
seems
trying
like
to
this is
figure
like
out
one of
how
those
this company
grants that came in and somebody applied for and then
So
fully funded by federal funds. So it's obviously one of these items that, and we're in the second year, so I'm assuming there's some data regarding what they did on the first year.
yes. So
Yeah.
when you have a federal grant, you have to submit a plan of how you're going to spend the money. And that's approved, by the State Department. And then part of our, annual audit is making sure that these expenditures line up with the way that the federal grant is the guidelines are set forth. So.
I have a quick question regarding this, but I think we will have to wait for the board meeting with that, particularly with this one, because I've been through my job, I actually been working on this grant since before it was even submitted to the government. We actually received it and still work with it today. So I think we'll have to wait to the board meeting for me to, I'm not going to vote. This is just information, but when it goes to the board, then I will have to ask legal, can I even do anything with this one since I have been working with cultivating leadership over the past few years. And I think we're in a 3rd year, okay.
So do you want to hold off discussion on the grant until once we present it? to the
I know
board?
for number 8, I don't think I can do anything with that. I don't think I can vote on. I don't even.
Oh,
think
I
we
see
can-
what you're saying. You have to recuse yourself.
Right. I've been.
I understand. Yeah, this is only a committee meeting, so I think, Darren, I think we're okay. I think we can move forward on that and oversee that.
Right.
It may be even helpful because it is a federal grant to hear your input on it, during the board meeting. I don't see why you'd be recusing yourself because you probably got insight, but I'm sure staff's got it well staffed and understanding too. But I see your point. Noted.
Mhm.
The only other one is item 15. Once again, this is just for clarification because it says it's Title II, and today I learned that there's Title II, Title III, Title IV, and obviously Title I. So this is a Title II project. So it's my understanding that under this funding, and that we would be contributing something out of our general operating funds. So this isn't 100% funded, or is it?
No, sir. Good afternoon. This is exclusive and 100% Title II grant funding. For the purpose of professional development.
Under the federal guidelines, do they require competitive bidding under these groups? I mean, I know we have this exemption, which seems to be used, and Ms. Carlin, when do you want to discuss this? I mean, I don't know, you're going to tell me which exemptions used the most. Do you want to, I'm trying to figure out which action item you want to wait till we get down to C, 4C to talk about it?
I would like to.
Yeah, let's go. Let's see. That's fine. So it's 100% funded under Title II. Everything was approved, and is it a multi-year contract? No, it's just,
It's not, but it does apply to 3 distinct departments. And so instructional programs, the leadership pipeline, and curriculum instruction all have a part of this package. We just collapsed it together because it's one vendor.
and what exactly is accomplished by this?
They all relate to professional development
Mhm.
around leadership practices. Certain segments will be able to train others. So we believe that's a way to build capacity. And then the C&I component relates to our instructional framework. As it stands, we don't have an existing instructional framework in the district. That's the engineer, that's the infrastructure, if you will, by which all of our teaching and learning practices will reside. And so we thought it important now that we've had our shored up, guaranteed and viable ELA and math curriculum to embrace that, to ground that, to anchor that with an instructional framework that from pre-K to 12th grade, all teachers can root their work in. And so that's the purpose of Dr. Davis's package. Gail Morris is the leader of the instructional leadership pipeline piece. Hers is exclusive in particular to developing aspiring leaders in the district. And then LaShawna Harris has the final component around offering teachers and assistant principals PD, professional development.
And so this is a grant that you went out and identified, and
We are allocated.
Oh,
as
allocated.
Grant funded each year on an annual basis.
So this question is not particular to the Title II conversation that's going on, but even though we have these exemptions, many times there are multiple suppliers that can provide the same type of service under that exemption. So how is the vendor determined when there are multiple vendors that can provide that same type of service? What's the process and who makes the determination as to the vendor selected? Not that we're going out for a formal bid, but so that it's spread out, we're not going back to the same vendor over and over again. How is that determined? Or who determines the vendor?
Ms. Stamp, I think what we're going to do on that, if I can, interpose on this one, I think we're going to wait to item 4C, and then we're going to let Ms. Carlin walk us through
Okay,
the
so that's
process.
under-
Because it's actually, I appreciate it, it's specifically laid out as the 710 exemption. So I think that'll be a great time to discuss it. I have no further questions on the list. Any other further comments from committee? Hearing none, I'd like to make a motion to approve the list of contracts greater than 250,000 or more to be presented today by staff, as presented today by staff, to be brought to the board for approval.
So moved. Second.
A vote, all in favor, say aye. All against, say nay. Hearing none, the motion is approved, and this will be pushed on to the board for approval. Next, on to item 3C, which is the 2023-2028 capital programs phase 5 sales tax budget reallocation. Only one item.
Thank you, Mr. Grabowski and audit.
And
member.
Ms. Costello, I really apologize for not giving you name credit for that wonderful audit report. So I want to give you named credit for that.
Go ahead, Ms. Shaw.
Okay, thank you so much. This particular reallocation is needed to fully fund the Whitesides Elementary Car Loop Extension project. During the review process with the Town of Mount Pleasant's Stormwater Design Department, they have required additional stormwater measures to prevent flooding at the school. As a result, the 2 general contract bids that came in were substantially over budget. This reallocation is a request to use $900,000 of projected excess revenues within the Phase 5 sales tax program. And that completes my reporting on this item, pending any questions.
Any questions from the committee? So if we go 900,000, what's that? I mean, I forget what the balance was.
If we increase it with 900,000, the final balance would be $1.8 million, roughly speaking.
Yeah, that's gonna be one of the questions. Any further questions for the committee? Hearing none, I'd like to make a motion to approve the reallocation of funds as presented today by staff and the attached resolution be brought to the board for approval. Can I
Second.
have a vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against, say nay. The motion passes and we present it on to the board. Item 4, monthly capital reports. Projects report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Grabowski, committee members, and Superintendent Gallion. I'd like to present the June capital projects report. Our revenue collections were $424,000 below our cash flow model projection based on the most recent collections with a 2% growth over the prior year. Our expenditures are as follows for June. The 2010 through 2016 building program were $14,000. The 2017 through 2022 program, $3.1 million. The 2023 through 2028 program, $7.7 million. The 2023 through 2028 building program funded with long-term debt was $410,000. Our fixed cost of ownership fiscal year 24 projects and program have commenced and are moving forward. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Any questions from the committee members? Thank you very much, as always. Moving on to item 4B, the Audit and Finance Committee membership.
Thank you, sir.
Carlin, if I could
Thank you.
ask
So-
for your assistance.
Sure, yes, sir. So we just wanted to provide to the Audit and Finance Committee the membership information that was sent to the board a few this month. And basically what that consists of is identifying that non-board members have historically, non-board members to Audit and Finance Committee have not been recommended as appointees to the committee by individual school board members. Historically, what happens is when a sitting person, when their time is up or they resign or their term expires, what we do is we actually post that in the newspaper and for interest so that we can get or select the best qualified candidate. Currently, we have a banker that has expertise in bonds on the committee, as well as a procurement specialist or procurement expert. And then we also have a financial analyst. And we also have someone with a extensive background in finance technology. And so we just wanted to bring that not only to the Audit and Finance Committee because we shared it with the board, but because we've had so many terms renew time after time, I think we've just lost track of how we normally handle these. And so we wanted to put all this in on a one pager and just explain it. And with that, we had a board person recommend 2 possible memberships that were attached in board docs. And with that, I'll let Mr. Grabowski take over.
And I truly appreciate the history report and looking at the history of how this committee was working, how it has been working. I mean, obviously, I can't thank the committee members enough for the time they take out, their day to address these issues. I mean, the work on the budget I found was absolutely fascinating, and I really appreciate their opinion. At the same time, I don't, I think one of the things we always want to make sure is that you're not asking somebody to put in, too much time for, sometimes you do need to refresh, your committee members. When is our next, maybe you can clarify, when is the next term, potential term changeover?
I do not have that with me. I know that Trina had supplied that information, but I did not bring it with me to this meeting. My apologies, but I can definitely make the board aware. Trina, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe most of the terms have are up for the probably next year.
We just renewed 2 of them this year, and they're typically 2-year terms.
Okay.
And what month do we typically do this?
Well, it depends on when it was approved.
Got it. Yeah, because I've looked at the procedures and I see it under our charter that we have the ability to expand if we feel like there's a need or a potential area that's not covered. No question, talking to the committee members, adding, Stephen Drake was critical for the IT purposes. I really feel, and second of all, I definitely think if you're going to this is not something that's really set up for us to be, while I think people are qualified, at the same time, I think if we look at the history and the way the procedures are written, that, we should be very transparent in posting any openings once we do have an opening. And right now, there are no openings on the committee. I've talked to many people that have an interest in serving on this committee, but right now I'm reluctant to change the makeup or add any more voices. I think the public has, as we've shown through these committee meetings, Dr. Temple has definitely taken advantage of this. We welcome outside opinions on many and I think Ms. Carlin, you and I had talked about it, that, there is a way for the public to, if they wanted to voice an opinion on an issue during a committee meeting, they're more than free to do such a thing. I leave this open. Any comments from the committee regarding this issue?
Yeah, I've been going over this and trying to wrap my head around it. I mean, I don't see an issue with opening it up more. Because it says, comprised of at least 6 independent voting members. I don't see a problem with opening it up more as long as we establish a process to do that. We establish that process to do that, put out the call for it. Put out a call, even if it's an open call, say if we went up to 8 independent voting members or 9 independent voting members or whatnot, and have people apply for it, then we receive the committee, not the way we have it right now with the resumes up on the public side, but the committee actually review the resumes, and then the letter of intent by each candidate goes to the public side. I think I don't see a problem with adding more folk, because it's not like we have people knocking down the door to join the Audit and Finance Committee. So if we do have people who are interested in joining, want to be public service and help us the way in any way that we can, I think we should open it up, but again, make it that transparent process of allowing open application process, letting them submit and then moving forward from there. I do not believe we should have appointments though by different board members.
I agree. Probably something that we need to clarify in the charter. I think the procedure that you laid out, Mr. Calhoun, is perfect, spot on. You know, I do think, you know, what we need to do, look from staff, is to look at some of the dates of, you know, how we've got this. So, you know, we add accordingly so that if we do have a changeover every year of a couple members, that we always have people that are experienced sitting on the committee. So I think that's something that we need just to probably look at, and then, because it's really up, I would think, we don't have Ms. Taylor here or somebody for recommendation, but I think this is up to the board for making determination.
Well, the way
it says in our charter that we have that ability, but I think this is
right. Well, I think the way that is written in our charter, it will the recommendation would come from our committee to be changed through will actually come from our committee because if I'm correct, they won't change the board won't change our charter, you know. So I think we should work on it on our end internally as far as the audit and finance committee to be put forward so we can make those changes to say, all right, you know, the terms are from this date, not this date, but this month from last, or just adding some minor changes to our charter and then push it forward that way. But yeah, like I said, at this point, I don't see why we wouldn't. Oh, it's already there. Yeah, I don't see why we wouldn't or couldn't add more people to our committee because the language is technically there right now. And I think Mr. Duke is trying to say something, but your microphone is acting up a bit.
I was just going to make the more we can have on the committee, views and opinions on that. I think we've established precedent though, and there's nothing within the charter saying that can't be done, you know, via board election on it. But I was going to say, from an openness and a transparency standpoint, you hit it right on the head. I think from a precedent standpoint, taking out the bid, and, you know, I don't know what would stop us from doing it now if we wanted to do that on it. If we want to get more voices in, I mean, I think it's something that's going to add value to the committee potentially, and just differing opinions as well too, and give a broader perspective.
And since this is only on an information, I think, Darren, what we should do is you should write down, because I think the process that you spoke is perfect. It's spot on. And we can probably move forward with it as, you know, something that the board can take up, you know, at the next board meeting.
Yeah, I'll start putting that together.
I have one comment. I don't know if this would be something we would want to consider including in our look at the charter, or if it's something we would consider incorporating into whatever solicitation we would put out there. But at least one perspective, my perspective, would be that we would emphasize to prospective participants that the role of this committee, at least in my opinion, is not policy oriented. That's the school board's domain. That our real priority here is prudent fiscal stewardship of the financial position of the district. And if there's any way we could emphasize that so that folks don't view this as a quote unquote backdoor way to circumvent policy objectives of the broader board.
I would agree with that.
I agree with that 100%. And we had talked earlier, you know, and this is, you know, coming up with a better strategic plan for the committee, you know, that we put in place as to trying to make this procedure a little, especially with the budget, you know, being a little more clear as to, and that's for charter discussion. So I think that will be definitely taken up at the next in September. Would be the next meeting, which we'll pass it around. But I think what we would do is incorporate anything that Mr. Calhoun brought up for presentation to the board. That would be, the recommendation would be made to incorporate that into the charter so that it's written and can be found and it's open and everybody knows Well, Mr. Calhoun, I definitely appreciate it. That's, I think we're on the right track on that one.
Absolutely. There's no reason for our charter not to be the guiding charter for other committees on that the board has or will it eventually put together. So we should start on our own and, you know, have that be the model going forward throughout the rest of the board as well.
He was trying to say something. Stephen,
Stephen, do you have something to say? Can you hear? You're muted.
Oh, I think he's frozen.
Oh, he's frozen. Go figure, an IT person. Frozen. He probably wants another IT expert on the committee. But as I understand with IT, it's a wonderful process because he's got his own, you know, public committee. And I really think that that's one of the elements that makes this committee so strong is having, you know, the outside of the board representation. And I agree with Mr. Calhoun. I mean, you're right. There's no reason that we can't expand it to get a, you know, a broader reach. But we do need to identify the certain areas that we must have, you know, coverage on expertise. That's
I think we got
seen the
Mr. Duke now.
success of the IT. So,
Mr. Duke.
Stephen, you're on
Sorry
first.
about that. Yeah. So I switched, had to switch over devices since the mic was causing too many issues on the computer. But just as I was trying to say is, you know, I agree that the group, you know, as a committee, you know, we are, you know, a small group, and probably if you compare to other audit and other committees, you know, they have a larger body. So, you know, as long as the rules and procedures are followed, you know, that, oh, we want to increase the group by 2-3 new individuals. And then once we decide that, and then open it up for all available candidates and go through our normal selection process, you know, I agree. I see no issues with doing that.
So are you proposing you'd like to see this at the next meeting, next audit and finance committee meeting?
Yeah, we can bring it up in the next audit and finance committee.
And we'll make it an action item.
How much we want to, how large we want to create it. And then, you know, are we going to go for specific people in those positions like we've done for some of these where, you know, this one's geared towards finance, this one's geared towards technology.
And that would be perfect because then we can, Ms. Carlin, you and I can try to finalize with the rest of the committee members, the charter. So this would be a perfect time to, if we're going to make the finalized charter, taking in Mr. Calhoun's language, everything for consideration, we'll take it for consideration at September meeting and then make it an action item in September. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Any further questions? We will move on to item 4C, Charleston County District Consolidated Procurement Code, Section 710 exemptions. Ms. Carlin.
thank you. So this has been popular this afternoon. So you had requested that we take a look at the exemptions that are currently in our Consolidated Procurement Code. Over the last 3 to 4 months, we've used approximately 16 exemptions, as well as the ones that are included on the $250,000 list that was presented earlier. We've used the category for educational copyrighted materials once. We've used the category for government services, which was the one for today with the municipalities to cover our schools. We've used that 4 times. For educational services, we've used that 6 times. And for staff development, we've used that 5 times. So I just want to
Those
go
numbers just for this fiscal year or
just
calendar
went back the
year?
It is part of this fiscal year, yes, ma'am, but I only went back about 3 or 4 months. That I didn't go all the way back to July. I can do that for the next meeting, but it's gonna take me some time.
I think this was just a sample that I had asked Ms. Carlin, to pull up. And mainly because it seems like the 710, 1.7, well, a lot of these, I mean, I can understand the copyright issue. Because I think that's actually in the procurement code.
So yeah, that includes
Yeah, that one's
books,
actually in the
dictionaries,
procurement code, right.
textbooks, professional journals, technical pamphlets, educational films.
Published books, periodicals,
DVDs,
and
yeah.
pamphlets. Yeah, so that one is actually in the procurement report.
The one for governmental services, I don't think anyone has an issue with that.
No.
The next one, the educational services. So this includes, contractual and co-op agreements for services to students. It involves consultants for evaluation of academic programs, evaluation services and expenses of various committees such as the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, tuitions paid to institutions of higher ed, that doesn't apply to us, professional artists by the South Carolina Arts Commission, and other professional artists services, including dancers, writers, poets, theater groups, craftsmen, and other services. So I'm not sure that's an issue with the concern with the exemptions. I believe what the concern is probably staff development. And this is includes but not limited to training provided by consultants, certified teachers and trainers, or district personnel, training materials secured or prepared for instructional purposes, workshop, conference, seminar registrations, and then travel expense associated with that. The other ones we haven't used that much. So I guess just for clarity, which
I think you're absolutely right. I think the main one is the 710 1.7. And it's, a lot of this is understanding that some of these exemption expenses is not only vendor related, but could be for staff. As I'm understanding. So if the staff were to come up with wanting to go to workshops, conferences, or something, they would use this exemption.
So,
No?
so for me, the issue is not so much the exemption itself, but the policies and procedures around using the exemptions so that you can ensure that, you're being fair in the process, that every time you need a certain type of vendor, you're not going back to the same vendor, or who's making the choices about the vendors. That are those types of items included in the policies and procedures? Because we just have a list of the exemptions, but it doesn't cover how those exemptions are to be used, or what the process is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I had brought up the question to the auditors, on the policy. If you're going to review the policy, Ms. Stamp's concerns are valid, especially with this exemption, because they've been large. I mean, some of these amounts are pretty large amounts, and it's just.
And I mean, even with the group that presented today, it appeared that they did an audit. So they did the audit, they came up with the findings, and then that same entity was used to develop, and I guess they went under a different contract to develop and work with the procuring department to develop the policies and procedures. So it's almost, I don't know what the rules are around that, but it's close to being a conflict, that they're the ones that audited and developed these policies and procedures, and then they're also the ones with the contract to develop the corrective actions needed for the report.
Okay. I may need to go back and do some additional research to meet with the right people that
Yeah,
not only the people that put this on the list, but as well as procurement, just to make sure I have a clear understanding, because I don't want to give an incorrect information. I do know that when we find a vendor that falls under one of these exemptions and they do a great job, we do want to reward them and continue service with them. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes going with a vendor that is less cheaper has created issues for us. Not all the time, but there have been instances. But I'll pass this over to Michelle. Maybe
And it's not so much going with a vendor that's cheaper, but if you have comparable suppliers that can both do the jobs, just to stick with the same one, or are we really in the spirit of the, of the code?
Ms. Stamp, and to the committee at large, I can't speak to the overall essence, intention, guidelines attached to this exemption, because I'm relatively new in this role, just like Ms. Carlin is interim and in her role. But I can say that for my time sitting in the chief academic officer seat, I have introduced no new contracts. They all were vetted, procured, and secured under the last CAO. And I reached out to ask her, can you tell me some background on some of the contracts? And a lot of them were initiated at the onset during the height of the pandemic. And for instance, the Saga high dosage tutoring package at the time, Ms. Belcher tells me that was the only high dosage tutoring show in town. And so in large part, we typically procure multi-year contracts. And to Ms. Stamp's point, not that having a contract with a vendor, having success with the vendor, having results attached to the product they provide doesn't necessarily mean you stick with them, but that has been the standing, our approach, at least through the pandemic, attached to ESSER, in that our sole purpose in using that recovery money was to recoup learning loss, to accelerate learning in a way where we were closing those gaps at a significant rate. And so I can't say every single package, every single program was attached to a vendor who was the only show in town. The one for today, for example, at Elements, is a vendor that the State Department of South Carolina, the South Carolina Department of Education, has procured to usher in our work around our strategic plan, our academic recovery plan, again, attached to our COVID recovery. And with that partnership, they've been in the district since 2016. I know that the vetting did take place with them, but again, we were in essence lifting up the work that was already in place. And so I, like everyone else, look forward to unpacking and stamping exactly what that provision, that exemption allows us to do, and making sure we're doing our due diligence moving forward.
All right. And I kind of want to, I'm sorry, I would kind of like want to add to that as well, because just even bringing it down to a micro level, with the spirit of what 71017 is looking at, say for like workshops, conferences, and seminar registrations. If I have an academic conference that I'm going to, let's say National Council for Black Studies, just because ASALA offers something similar, or let's say the Southern Conference for African American Studies Incorporated offers something similar, if I know I'm getting, and I know teachers are getting a proven commodity from this one conference, we're going to continually send them to that one conference. Or even like with the travel expenses, we all know from Charleston, the cheapest way to fly to New York is JetBlue. Even though Delta flies the same exact route, we're not going to send them on Delta just because they offer that same exact service. We have those provisions to say, all right, this is the best way for us to travel. This is the best workshops, the best training to have for our teachers and educators and staff and higher ups. So that's what we're going to use for. So I understand bit about, we do want to have that oversight to say, all right, we need to take a look at some of these things, but we really just need to be, really a lot of it, we just need to be practical about if we're bringing in some training that has a proven track record and we have evaluations that show we have a proven track record, we shouldn't put any more hurdles for us to be able to secure that in.
Well, I guess from my perspective, I'm just looking at it from the point of view. And I think when you're talking about training and airlines and that type of thing, that's a different ballgame than some of these items that's listed on the contracts that's sent through for us to approve to send to the board for approval. And you're actually talking about contracts that even though there is an exemption, if you have 2 or 3 identifiable suppliers that can perform that, why not compete it? Even though the requirement is not there, you have multiple, so why not compete it to you may get the best. And who determines that? That was my whole question. Is there something in the policies that stipulates who determines what vendor we're going to go with when you may have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 that performs these same types of services? Who makes that decision? And then once you make that decision, you just stick with that person forever. So my question is just around the process and just ensuring that the process that's there is transparent and fair to the suppliers of that may be within our state.
Yeah, I have to agree with Ms. Stamp. I mean, I feel very uneasy with a general exemption without competitive bidding because you just don't know. We may the group may perform well, we may like them, but that doesn't mean that they're the best. They were the best when we hired them and we were happy with them. But at the same time, for transparency's sake, I really have a hard time with this one. I think some of the amounts that Mr. Calhoun may have been talking about, or instances Mr. Calhoun was talking about, are a little different because it's almost you're getting into the sole source type of situation, whereas you've got a specific conference, and it's a pretty. I think each conference is different and limited, so I really don't have problems with that. But I think it's really when we're getting into the bigger, the big ones, even the ones that go to board approval, but anything over $50,000 that it just seems like you would want to have some type of competitive bidding. And I just look at the way, I look at all the vendors that we're using under the ESSER funds, and it's like looking at a dashboard. And I know we really didn't talk about the dashboard that was recommended, because I think that is a wonderful thing. And I know we can go deeper on the dashboard. But, I don't know the legal ramifications of posting contracts, of looking exactly how, whether we, you really don't go into those weeds, but, it's really just as to auditing and seeing what the policy, who's checking this, who's looking at this, and who's responsible. Because, we are an audit and finance committee. I mean, so those procedures and knowing how this works. So whenever you see this special exemption come through, it just seems like it's really limited to very few people. And, that's why, I guess I'll be really interested to look at, some more clarification from the policy, the new director we hire. But I do appreciate you looking into this. I appreciate Ms. Simmons' comments about it. I mean, it's definitely one that is troubling, that's all. And it'll be interesting to hear how, this discussion goes over to the board. I mean, this is an information item. It's not an action item. It's just something for us to really start talking about and looking at as we come out of COVID and as we come out of ESSER funding.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, with your permission, I think I'll have enough time between now and the August board meeting to get more concrete information together about how this works. And I might even bring someone from the procurement office to answer questions I may not be able to answer on the spot.
That would be great. That'd be wonderful. I think that's smart.
Are you okay with that, Dr. Gallion? Okay.
So
Thank you, sir.
I don't know how hard this is to do, so it may be unworkable, but would it be possible to take a period of time, with a full year would be great, but if it was a month or 6 months, and take all of our spending and quantify how much of it gets approved through the different pathways, so we could have a sense of the scope of how much is flowing through each approval path. And then that would be a step one, but then perhaps we pick some cases, and I don't know if it's just for illustrative purposes, but this is a type of expenditure that a board member or a constituent might want to understand. How does this get approved? And then what are the controls around it? You know, because I can understand why there are reasons why we use these paths, but I think help this committee understand, even if we go down this path, what are the other controls that we have in place that make sure, like who asks for it, who reviews it, who approves it, and how does it get there? Because my suspicion is even if it goes through one of these exemptions, there are still people who are looking at it to make sure that
Yes.
it's a prudent
It meets
use
the
of,
criteria.
right? So right. So
That's a good point.
so I think if we quantify how much is in the different buckets, but then we take in some of these exempted paths, give us examples and just talk us through, hey, I'm a teacher or a principal who wanted this program. How did I get that approved? So would that be helpful?
Absolutely, for transparency, for, equality, or however we're looking at it, because that's always the question comes up. I can pick apart a bunch of them and say, why did they get this money and this other district didn't get this money? And then you have a special exemption, you're going, well, this doesn't look right. So I think you're right. I think it's a great, and if you can get that before the board meeting, I think that'd be wonderful in your presentation, because I think the board really needs to understand how these special exemptions, because they see it come up all the time. And it's been, I appreciate what you've done. You've really enlightened me. So that's a good question. Any other questions from Mr. Calhoun? Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much. We will move on to the ESSER update.
Thank you. So ESSER 1, as you already know, we have spent 100% and been reimbursed to date at $13.4 million. For ESSER 2, the FY23 actual to date is $25.2 million. We're up $3.3 million in spending from last month. We have approximately $292,000 encumbered and about $3 million remaining. And yes, we are going to spend all $3 million of that before our September 30th deadline. For ESSER 3, we have spent to date $63.7 million. We have approximately $5.3 million encumbered, and we have a remaining approximately $82.4 million. One of the things that I had added to this particular agenda item was a ESSER 3 non-salary detailed report. One of the things that came up at our last meeting when we were showing the dashboard, there was some concern of, can we go even deeper? We want to see, we want to see vendor payments, vendor detail. And so I wanted to provide this to see, this is a report that Lisa and her team create and pull this data straight out of Munis. And it does provide by not only object, but by project and payment details of what all has been paid. And this does not include employee salaries. This is just non-salary expenditures. And as you can tell, for the month of from June 1st to June 30th, it was approximately $3.4 million in vendor payments. It's a long report. I think it was like 21 pages. We can't compact it any smaller, then you won't get the detail that I feel like, is being asked, of us. But I can continue to provide this report until we can figure out what we can do with the ESSER dashboard.
So can you provide a report by object class of just not to this level of detail, but just at an object class detail. So you can show, say, the spending you've done today, say for ESSER 1, if you can you break it down, break that 13 million down by object class to show how much was spent on purchase services or personnel, or you can get it to that level, right? Because that would show in total by object class where the monies were spent. And then if somebody needs the detail, you can always go back and get this level of line item detail.
Yes, ma'am, because actually this report is online. We just didn't
Okay.
realize if everyone knew that, and so we want to share that as well. But yes, ma'am, we can take all 3 ESSER funds and break it down by object, like what you just recommended. I mean, I'd like to hear from the entire committee. Is this something that you would find useful?
Definitely, because, you know, the one that keeps popping out at me is the Barbara Dillinger, you know, and I look at this, you know, $85,000. I see the original agreement with her for consulting services was 249,000. So it was like 1,000 under the 250. So, you know, to me as an audit and finance guy, that's a red flag right off the bat. That, you know, how can you get to 249 because you're 1,000 underneath the board approval? And then I see these amounts going out and I have no clue whatsoever why all this money's going out to one vendor for consulting services. So, you know, it's almost like you know, because when you look at, you know, some of this, and, you know, when you talk to, you know, procurement people about it, it's the cumulative effect of any one vendor is very important when you're looking at the auditing process for the year. Because, you know, there's just so many problems we get with breaking up a contract, especially on the 50,000 level, which I'm not, you know, I don't want to ever go down to that level. But it just seems with the ESSER funding, you know, that one, and I asked you to do the report and you only came up with 2 names. I mean, 2 people that came close to it. So I was pretty impressed with that. But then you look at the report, you see an awful lot of consultants that are making 45,000, 50,000. And if we were doing the through procurement, it would have had to have gone out to competitive bid once it went over 50. So, you know, I see a lot of those in this, you know, these reports when I add up the numbers. But, you know, I think as we're winding down, that's why I will present to this board. We have a wonderful line item budget report that shows the departments and not only who works for who or whatever, it also shows how many ESSER funded positions are in these departments. This is just the central staff report, and going through it with Ms. Carlin, it was very eye-awakening. But it's the same thing with this, with what you were giving me. I mean, I appreciate where you went. Any committee members have any regards to the way this is being reported on the dashboard? Mr. Calhoun?
Or, I mean, I was looking too, I mean, if it's 21 pages, there's always ways to dice that information down and make it smaller for everyone who's looking for that information. So they don't have to go through 21 pages worth of data. I just could go in there and give, you know, create a dashboard that says, I want all vendors, you know, that are underneath that window. And of course, that's not going to be 21 pages. Hopefully that's only a page worth of data, or, you know, how much money goes out to each of these vendors. And you can create a simple pie chart and say, hey, here's a pie and here's the top 5 vendors and how much of the pie they take. And then you can click on the details of that pie and drill down. So you're never printing out the 21 pages, but you're using the dashboard to drill down to exactly what you're looking for.
I completely agree. I did the same thing myself. I just really only use just Excel to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah.
What's the reason why the Amazon payments are showing up? The vendor is showing up as Bank of America as opposed to Amazon.
Are those P card purchases?
Yeah, Peacock.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I was talking to the Inspector General's office about that, and they said, you want to do something fun with P cards, write an algorithm in there asking for every P card purchase under $5, and then try justifying it. And you have, hundreds of thousands of pages. So you're right, getting a lot too far down is, I've seen the P card reports, and I'm always amazed that we have one line.
Well, and we're just trying to be transparent and get the information, it's a little frustrating when you've created all these different reports and then you come back and meeting after meeting, you're hearing that we're not giving people what they've asked for. And it's just, we're trying our best. And so.
Ms. Carlin, I think you're doing a great job. I mean, we are so much further than where we were when I first started. So I think you're just so close. I think one of the reasons I think this is where Mr. Calhoun and I need to talk, and a couple others, is to what are we trying to gain out of, how far we want to go down. I mean, my concern obviously is just, and we're at the end of ESSER, and I have a question for Dr. Gallion. Who is taking responsibility for the potential finding of funds for the teachers using the ESSER, what we may or may not be able to save? I mean, who's the point person on that?
I think the team itself has done various analysis on what positions need to be try to maintain and preserve for sustainability purposes. We're also going to get some of this information as we are getting ready to go into an agreement with the audit firm to do the ESSER audit, to auditing all of the ESSER funds. And so we'll see if that plan that we have in place is going to come out.
But who's going to be, I mean, there's got to be some point person that is really going to be the person. I mean, because we've made this statement that we're going to try to find this bonus money. And, we're now we're starting to move on, and this is going to be something that's going to be brought up, arguably. So good news is we got everybody under contract right now, which is good, but still, it'd be nice for a Christmas, pick me up that we can commit on our goal. So it'd be nice to know that we had a point person. I know Mr. Cobb or Dr. Cobb, is it Dr. Cobb? And Mr. Cobb. Mr. Cobb was overseeing, the ESSER.
He by himself can't do it. You have to have, because the money falls in various hands. So you have to have everyone at the table to really understand what's going on. It's such a large organization.
So you're the point person.
Yes, I'm
the captain. The captain's going up with the ship. Well, I just want to, it's not forgotten. And I hear what you say, that we are going to find it, and I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Mr. Grabowski, Dr. Gallion has asked us, in fact, tomorrow we're convening at 11:30. The chief leaders that's sitting at this table and the associate superintendents to try to just tomorrow. I can't promise that we'll finalize where all that money's coming from, $19.6 million, I believe it is, but the chief leaders in this table behind me and the associate superintendents sit together tomorrow for a good portion of the day to try to finalize where the 19.6 coming from.
Excellent.
That's wonderful news. I would just like everybody in the room to know that teachers are calling me and emailing me and wondering what the time frame might be for that notification. And I tell them, I promise as soon as I know, you will know. But if while you're looking, you also consider a time frame, that will help with anxiety, perhaps, for budgets. And I've also explained to some of the teachers, like we talked about before, that it might not be all 5,000 at once. It might be 2,500 here, 2,500 there. But if we can consider a time frame and a distribution schedule, if we can put that into the mix.
Yes,
Since
ma'am.
there's nothing.
We'll use that tomorrow as part of our conversation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the hard work everybody's doing on this issue. I know it's definitely something that's, it's a tough one. I think it's a well use of the funds, and I think the teachers deserve it. So I think, and I appreciate your attention to it. So any further questions from the committee? Hearing none, we will move on to contracts greater than 250,000 pursuant to South Carolina Code 304070A2. I got a feeling, Ms. Carlin, this may be something that we just want to talk about next month at when we talk about the charter for the committee. Okay, and really what that was for the committee's information is I had requested to talk about what the amount was, whether we were happy with keeping board approval at 250 or bringing it down lower. And unless somebody wants to discuss it now, I was almost thinking about reaching out and working with Mr. Calhoun, getting a proposal together, and then seeing if we want to take that up. We can take that up next month as to the discussion, but that's what it was about. Would anybody like to discuss it now, or are you all good with waiting until next month?
I do believe we should wait, and as we do wait, I would like, I think I said this before, getting comparable, getting some of the comparable districts to actually to show where we are and to show if we're right there, if we're high or if we're low as well. Because I would hate to be doing something in Greenville or doing something completely different. So yeah, I would, when we do talk about it at a later point, I would like to have that with us as well.
You got that, Ms. Carlin? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's the way to go. Thank you. I think that's great. Okay, on to bond ratings. Good information.
Yes.
Here we go.
Yes. So back in June, the Audit and Finance Committee and the board approved a resolution authorizing the issuance of installment purchase revenue refunding bonds. It was a great time for the market, and the bonds were actually sold the other day, and we actually came in higher than 4% in savings. I don't have the information with me. I apologize. I should have brought that with me. But the good news is we had two separate credit opinions before the refunding was done with Moody's Investor Services and S&P Global Ratings. And I'm proud to report as far as Moody's Investors Services goes, they assigned a AA3 rating to our our refunding bonds. We maintained our AA2 issuer rating and our AA2 rating on our long-term general obligation unlimited tax bonds, and AA3 rating on the district's outstanding installment purchase revenue bonds, and maintain the MIG1 rating on the district's bond anticipation notes. That is a good thing. One of the things that we always point out is factors that could lead to an upgrade in our rating are significant and sustained improvement in fund balance and liquidity, and moderation of our long-term liabilities ratio. Factors that could lead to a downgrade include trend of operational imbalance that materially erodes fund balance or liquidity, and then large increases in overall leverage or fixed costs. As far as the S&P Global Ratings, they revised the outlook from stable to positive, which was a great thing for us. We were real excited to see that. They assigned a AA long-term rating with a positive outlook to our installment purchase revenue refunding bonds, and affirmed the AA rating on our existing installment purchase revenue bonds with a positive outlook. According to their rating, the downside scenario, how we could actually downgrade our results. It could happen if the district experiences consecutive years of operating deficits, which we have not done, with its available fund balance, and the overall financial position is declining relatively to those of similarly rated school districts. Upside scenario to demonstrate improved financial management practices, which we've done as evidenced by the balanced operations and improved or sustained available fund balances beyond the recent federal support of funds. So with that, both reports were very good and very positive, and just wanted to share that with Audit and Finance Committee as well as the board.
Any questions from the committee? If I had roses, I'd give them to you, but it was definitely a wonderful report. Now, on to the multi-year financial update, which is a great segue.
So as promised, we put together our multi-year revenue and expenditures projection for going out to FY26. I'll just go through the report, how it's laid out for those that have not seen this in a while. The first section talks about our projected revenues, and then the second section talks about our projected expenditures. The first 8 columns is our historical data, where we've got actuals. And what we mean by actuals is our financial statement or our financial audited actuals for 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. And so this just gives you a historical analysis or perspective of revenues as well as expenditures. The columns in blue, we just always do this. We take an average over the last 4 years, and that helps us project out, in the future. The next column over is our FY 2023 budget. And then in yellow, you'll see our projected at year end. We are still working through the June financials with accruals and just finalizing those last details. So this projected at year end is through our May 31st financial update that was presented. And as we get additional information, we'll upgrade this particular column. And then a couple columns over, you'll see our FY24 budget column. This is what was just approved or adopted on earlier in July. For revenues, we're looking at $702.4 million. And for expenditures, we're looking at $716.8 million total. And you'll see at the bottom that in our budget, we did budget for the use of fund balance for about $14.4 million. So the next column over, we have projected FY25 revenues and expenditures. Just on a very high level, the local revenues, we are projecting a 3% annual increase on property assessments, as well as a 3.3 annual millage increase. This is just a projection for FY25 and FY26. As far as our intergovernmental revenues, they are staying the same. On our total state sources, we are recommending, or we are projecting a 5% increase from state revenues. That might be a little bit low, but based upon this was the second year where we had the new state aid funding, and right now when you look at last year, this year, it looks like we got a 10% increase, and we're just not sure that's going to be the case moving forward. So instead of projecting at a 10% increase, we projected at a 5% increase to be more conservative. And obviously, as we get more information from the state, we will revise these projections. So total projections for FY25 on the revenues, we're looking at about $731.3 million. So then let's talk about expenditures. For total salaries and benefits, like I said, these are just projections right now. These are not guarantees. We're looking at doing teacher salary increases at a 2.5% cost of living adjustment, and non-teacher salaries at a 2.5% cost of living adjustment. No, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. For FY25 and 26, we're looking at a 2% cost of living adjustment and a step for 25 and 26. Historically, that's what we've done with projections. We're not recommending that by any means. We're just trying to get some numbers for Audit and Finance and the board to see where we are. As far as purchase services and supplies, the contractual obligations that we do know about have been factored into both of these years, as well as this, supplies. We bumped that up just a little bit, but not much. So overall for FY25, we're looking at projected expenditures around $736.5 million. And so when you compare that against the revenues that we're projecting, We are showing a budget shortfall of $5.2 million at this point. For FY 25, same thing. We're showing projected revenues around 758.6 million based upon what we know right now. And for projected expenditures, we're showing us $765.4 million. And when you look at the bottom, we are showing a budget shortfall of around $6.8 million. We will continue to refine this as we get additional information, but this is what we felt comfortable showing everyone right now based upon what we know as of today.
Any questions for the committee? I'm glad you took the conservative approach on the state, because it will be interesting to see how that comes out, because I think that will, have a major effect on this, and that will probably be what, next May, June.
I'm hoping we'll get additional, we did get an update the other day that I haven't had a chance to actually look at. And I apologize. There's just been a lot going on. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I will. I'm hoping that when they come back to session in January, if there is any changes to the House budget, to the State Department budget, State Department of Education budget, that we'll get some preliminary numbers probably in February or March. I just don't know at this point.
Sure. Yeah.
So.
Well, I think this is going to be very helpful as we look forward to developing this strategic plan for the committee and how we're going to start tackling some of this, so we can start working on the budget issues right away to make the process flow a lot easier. This is definitely a great starting point. So I appreciate you putting this together.
Right.
Any further questions from the committee? Hearing none. So we need to convene into executive session for contractual matters.
I move to go into executive session.
All in favor?
Aye.
We will move into executive session.
Maggie, are you moving us into a breakout room? Oh, never mind. Thank you.
Just Lisa and somebody else in the hall. Yeah. Here they go.
Would you like a motion?
Are we good? Everybody in?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting a motion back into open session.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are back in open session. We have from executive session, we have 2 action items. The first one would be, I'd like to make a motion to recommend to the board to approve the ground lease with Patterson Academy.
So moved.
Patterson's.
Patterson's Academy.
Patterson's Academy.
Patterson's.
Still so moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. The second one is a motion to recommend to the board to approve the negotiation of a real estate purchase. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Anyone against?
No.
None against? The motion passes. Closing items. Upcoming meeting is September 5th, 2023. Any further business? Hearing none. I have a motion to adjourn by standing up and leaving.
Would you like to identify the items going forward?
You want to identify the items that go forward to the board?
Back down. Identifying the items that are going forward to the board are the 2 motions that were discussed on the contractual matters. And the contract's greater than 250 and the 2023-28 capital program sales tax budget reallocation. Is that correct? Oh, and the presentations on the information side would be the procurement update by Malden Jenkins and the agreement upon procedures report for the 1-cent sales tax program. The monthly capital projects report. We don't need the audit and finance committee membership. We're gonna roll that one over. The 710 exemption and the ESSER update and bond ratings and the multiple year finance. That would be it.
You got that, Trina?
Not the other 250 code? We're not moving
No,
that one
we're going to
forward?
push that over into
We'll
September.
scratch
Yeah.
that one for right
Yeah,
now.
we'll scratch that one.
Okay, thanks,
We
Trina.
good?
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very